All right, I think we're live. Okay, we're live. Hey everyone, happy Sunday. Welcome and thanks for joining me in the session. Welcome to the session and thanks for coming in. Let's see, I think my sound should be working. So I want to say that I'm honored to be with you here in this time of sensitivity and uncertainty. And I look forward to spending time with you and sharing time with you in our shared sacred space together today. Today marks, I think we are in our 43rd session of doing these sacred space sessions to just offer support and some measure of comfort in this time of pandemic. And so I think we'll just jump in and get started. So the things we want to do together in our shared sacred space today will be to set sacred space, and then we'll have our overall topic. We're going to continue today in our sort of fairy tale format, where Gary, my editor, who's based in Bangalore, and I'm here in San Francisco, California, has, in the past week, selected a fairy tale from her, muse and intuition. We read it together, we brainstorm, and then we kind of figure out what the overall theme is, and then we've been bringing that to you here for several months now. And the topic for today will be a fairy tale that has kind of brought on this brainstorm around the topic of the gestation of the inner feminine. The gestation of the inner feminine. And we'll talk about what that means as well. We'll have our exercise after that, and then we'll go ahead and close sacred space. So that's the plan for today. And without further ado, I'll just jump right in and start the process. So I'll start by setting sacred space with all of you here together. And to do that, I'll start by saying that we would like to come together here today, now, to make a space, create a space here together, which is devoid of fear, threat, and control, in order for us to open to higher guidance from within our own selves, however we define it. It could be my inner intuition, it could be a muse, it could be flashes of insight coming from, wherever, just random flashes of brilliance. A safe sanctuary space here for us all to relax and surrender with no fear of any danger or threat, so that we can open to this inner guidance, however we define it, and that in so doing, we can then partake of the nourishment, the emotional nourishment and the spiritual nourishment that you can pretty much only get from being in sacred space together as a group, right? There's a certain kind of nourishment that only comes from being in sacred space. And that's what we come together here. We have been coming together every week to create together and then to partake of together, kind of like a potluck, kind of a meal or a celebration. And so in opening sacred space today, I will propose, as I do every week, that we follow the 4 principles of Presidian sacred space. The first is confidentiality. Standard Vegas rules: what happens in sacred space stays in sacred space. And now that's the rule we follow when we do these all over the world, pre-COVID, in person. Here it's online, the stream is public, the replay will be public. So the way we handle confidentiality here is through anonymization. And so if you would like to be anonymous as you participate in sacred space, you don't have to be, but if you would like to be, you would come into the Crowdcast stream, you would register, and then you would go into edit profile, and in that function, you would change your username to Harry Potter, Mickey Mouse, whatever, and then come back and participate, chat, ask questions, but you don't have to participate in any of that. We'll get to that in a moment. So number 1, confidentiality via anonymization. Number 2, no threat, no controlling, no fixing, no curing, no intervening, no tough love, no telling you what to do because it'll be good for you. And the reason for that is there's nothing wrong with sort of a little bit of well-intentioned tough love, but because that is of the provenance of control, right, trying to control you for your own good, and a little bit of a threat where it's like, you better take this medicine, you better take this advice, or I'm afraid that you'll, sort of your life will like sort of veer off a cliff or something, right? And I'm doing this for your own good. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but because that is a form of control, however well-meaning, it is of the provenance of the profane, because it's control. And so one of the powerful things about sacred space is that it's simply a space that's devoid of control. So what we do here is we are holding space for each other to be however we actually find ourselves, without any expectation that anyone's going to come in and try to adjust us or improve us or heal us or cure us. So if you find yourself to be afraid, to be anxious, or to be happy and relaxed, to be okay with how things are going, right, in your life, we don't try to change that. We don't make any comment on that. We just hold space for you. Now, if you yourself, right, have a reaction to how you actually are, you're afraid and you feel incompetent. You're anxious and you feel, oh my gosh, I shouldn't be so anxious. Or you're like, I should be. I mean, if we're not going to be anxious at this time in human history, when will we be anxious, right? Or you're happy and you feel fine with that. Or you're happy and you feel guilty about that. However, you are potentially fear, threat, and controlling yourself in sacred space. We make no comment on it because we're here to hold space for you and each other, however you find yourself to be, whether you're fully in control or you're just a hot mess. This is the space where you can actually be however you are without anyone coming in and trying to sort of grab the steering wheel of your life. And for many of us in the modern world, it's nice. It's kind of a rare, different kind of flavor of life to have an hour or two a week where no one's actually trying to tell you what to do. So if nothing else, that's something we hope to get out of these sessions and this time together. The third principle, which is a corollary of the second, the one I just mentioned, is that there's no commerce, right? So nothing may be sold. I can't sell you anything. Gary can't sell you anything. Please don't sell things to each other, obviously, in the chat. Because a sale, as we said in the very first session, is a form of veiled threat, right? If I tell you, oh, if you want to grow a beautiful mane of hair, you should try my hair tonic or whatever, right? It's well-meaning, sort of, but it's also a veiled threat because the threat is if you don't do this, you're not going to get the thing you want. So that's why in a sacred space, there's no commerce. But even aside from commerce, even if it's something that's free, even if you recommend a book that somebody else written that I have no, sort of affiliation with. So even recommendations or suggestions are discouraged in sacred space because it's a form of intervention. It's a form of offering with, I may not intend a threat, but if I tell you, oh, this is fantastic, this will absolutely fix what you have right now. The veiled threat is if you don't try it, you're going to miss out. And so many things in our lives, social media, everything, it's like, is all this veiled threat of like fear of missing out and everything. And those become, as a result, very profane spaces because of the control of other people, because of the control of the algo, trying to get you to do that next click. So anyway, no commerce, no recommendations. We are here for your energy, not for the things you bring. In other words, we are here for what you are, not for what you do or provide, not for the function or value add you may bring. We are here just for you. And the fourth principle, there's no expectation of participation. So there's no, again, no fear, threat, or control. So there's no pressure to do anything. We typically give an exercise at the end. It's totally up to you. It's just a suggestion. You don't have to stay. You don't have to go. You can recommend the session to your friends. You don't have to. It's whatever you want to do. There's no expectation of participation. There's no pressure to do anything. Again, the nourishment comes from the held space and your presence and attention, from what you are, not from what you do or provide. Now, as we've said in previous sessions and in the introduction, you can do sacred space on your own through meditation, going on a long run, sitting quietly. But when you do sacred space in a group, all of us together will tend to amplify that entire effect, right? And that's part of the fun of being together in sacred space. So this is what I propose. And if you are not okay with this, that's totally okay. Again, no fear, threat, or control for you to even come to sacred space or stay in sacred space. But that is kind of where we're about to go. We're about to cross the threshold over into sacred space. So if you're not okay with that, totally cool. We will give you a moment now and pause to give you a moment to make your selection and withdraw from the group if you don't want to continue, totally okay. And we'll still catch up with you later in profane space. If you're on my email list, obviously I'm still going to email you at some point. We'll still hang out, no worries at all. Okay. So I'll just give a pause for a moment for everyone to make their selection. Okay. And now, so for the rest of us, we will now move forward together across the threshold into sacred space. And as we come into sacred space, I will just remind of the 4 principles that we are all holding for each other and ourselves in sacred space: confidentiality, anonymization, no fear, threat, or control, no commerce, no recommendations, and no expectation of participation. Welcome. Welcome everyone to our weekly sacred space. All right. So let's get into it. So the topic for this week is called the gestation of the inner feminine. And the way we come up with these topics is I don't come up with a topic. Gowrie, my editor in Bangalore, comes up with a story. She reads it to me on our weekly call. Typically, my first reaction is like, huh? But then we sit with it. We hold space for the story because it has injected itself into our, sort of attention. And we just kind of kick the ball around and brainstorm. And then after that, we kind of step back and look at what we've, the garden path we've been led down. And then we're like, well, what do we even call this? And then that's how we come up with the title of the session. So the thing we ended up with that sounded the closest was this idea of the gestation of the inner feminine. This week, our brainstorm brought us to a reflection of the process by which the inner feminine comes into transformation and full power, right? And along the way, it's a circumambulatory, labyrinthine kind of, windy road, as all transformative organic processes are. Right, things are not sort of up and to the right in a straight linear, hierarchical, patriarchal sort of pattern. They follow organic patterns, which are curvy, spirally, twisty. Gestation and pregnancy is a non-linear kind of progression. Fermentation of wine, of other things, is a non-linear progression. So along the way, right, what then also is the role of things like turmoil, imperfection, failure, and even bad luck. And to view those things as critical aspects of the process, right? Not as accidents or disasters to be controlled and suppressed. So anyway, that's what we thought we'd do. And so we'll start by sharing the folktale that kind of spurred some of this on, which is actually from the Chinese tradition. And we'll let the golden thread lead us from there. So Gowrie, do you want to come up on screen and tell us about the story?
Hi, Artie. Hi, everyone.
Hello. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you. So yeah, the first time with the Chinese story.
Which is very annoying. Once I get sort of going in a certain vocabulary and tradition, your muse ends up changing and jumping into a different tradition. Super annoying.
Yeah.
And wonderful.
So yeah, so would you like me to start the story?
Yeah. Okay. Let's jump in.
Okay. So this week's story is called "The Waiting Maid's Parrot," and it's a story I picked up from Andrew Lang's fairy tale collection, and it's quite an extensive collection that Andrew Lang did for fairy tales over many years. So, and from all over the world. So this one's from the Chinese tradition. And the amazing thing about this entire collection, as well as this particular story, is we don't even know since when, or what is the date of origin of the story, and how far back it goes. And I'm sure if we read through the cultural aspects of the story, someone who's familiar with that culture might be able to point out, oh, I mean, if it has this aspect, it might be from this era. But that's not what we do in sacred space, at least. So it's very intriguing to see it as a universal kind of message. So the waiting maid's parrot, and the story goes that there was a young waiting maid who worked in a large household in the Sichuan province, and she was exceptional from all the other waiting maids at service in that house, in that she was beautiful and she was intelligent. And the master of the house favored her over all the other serving women. And therefore, he kept her apart from them. And it also happened that he had a special pet in the house. He was gifted with by a certain official or someone with a rare kind of parrot. It was so clever that it could actually speak with a human voice. And because there was this special pet and he had this favored servant and this waiting maid, he gave the job of taking care of this parrot to his favorite waiting maid. And then he made this her sole job, her sole duty. So one day when the maid was feeding it, the bird suddenly spoke to her and said, "You take good care of me, sister, and you will deserve a proper husband." So obviously, first of all, this came out of nowhere, and she's just a maid in waiting. So speaking of finding a good husband was obviously embarrassing. So she kind of blushed, and then she shushed the bird and said, "Stop it." But, the bird kept insisting and kept talking to her. So then it became a practice that the maid would keep, chattering with the bird, and the bird would chatter back. And they both kind of developed a friendship, a close bond and a friendship where they would talk to each other every day. And, she was all alone in a room with only the bird in a hanging cage, and there was no one else to talk to. So it was kind of, they became friends. And one day the maid was in the bath, and the bird also had just finished bathing. And because the bird was so tame, she didn't think of locking its cage, right? So, and she was in the bath, and to her surprise, it just shook its wings and dried itself, and it flew out of the cage, started circling the room. And at this point, she panicked and she snatched at it, but the bird just flew out of the window and was gone. The maid didn't know what to do. And she was obviously kind of terrified of telling her master what happened, but there was nothing else to do. So she went up to the master, and before she did that, what she did was she moved the cage outside of the room and kept it there, and then went to him and said, "I'm your obedient maid, and I forgot to close the door of the cage, but also I didn't expect someone to kind of take advantage of the situation. So someone came in and opened the door of the cage and released the bird. But I will also gladly, take the blame and take any punishment that you would give me for this mistake. But I'm really distressed that this happened. And the master, thought, well, there are many other maids in the house who are jealous of this particular waiting maid. So maybe someone did do it deliberately, and he accepted her story. So he started questioning everyone in the household and to find out what really happened so he could catch the real culprit who released the bird. But then he couldn't find anything, so the investigation was dropped. Now, several days later, the master's wife sent this waiting maid on an errand to another household and to this elderly lady. And she had a son, a young unmarried son. And he was, reading in a study or something. And a bird flew in through the window and settled itself on his desk. And it spoke to him in a human voice and said, "I've been looking for an ideal mate for you. And, all you have to do is just go out of your study and have a look." And this young man was completely startled. So he was like, what is going on? But he still tried to make sense out of this. He walked out of the room and he saw this young woman, so beautiful and, dressed in dark colors and a red skirt. And she was talking to his mother in a very shy way. And the parrot who told him about this was nowhere to be seen. So it was just disappeared. And this young man looked into the girl's face and he realized she was truly exceptionally beautiful. And, also learned that, she was a waiting maid at this household and everything. But he was utterly, utterly captivated by her beauty. And the waiting maid also noticed this young man, and she felt attracted to him as well. Now, they didn't speak to each other, but they kind of knew that they were both attracted to each other. And the waiting maid went back to her house and went to her room. And when she entered the room, she noticed that the empty cage that sat beside her bed, this bird was sitting right on top of it. And she was so happy that she'd found the bird back, and she tried to snatch it away and put it in the cage. And the bird fluttered away, and it said, "Well, here I am. I've been spending all this time dashing about, looking for a fine husband for you. And why do you want to lock me up? I've been just doing this for you all this while." So the maid was surprised by this. And so she told the bird to kind of give details. And the bird said, "Well, this is the young man, and I think he's the right man for you. And there's only so much I can do. I can't carry you both off the compound wall of the house and, liberate you. But what I can do is I can communicate your heart's desire to him. If this is indeed the man that you care for. So what is it that you desire?" Well, and the waiting maid kind of blushed and she couldn't reply. And the parrot just rolled its eyes and like, "Oh, well." And it flew off again. Now, the girl was attracted to this young man, but at the same time, she also kind of knew what was typically the destiny of a waiting maid of her status, right? She would probably be one of the master's concubines, or she would just spend the rest of her life serving in the house. And, what was she to do? There was simply no way that she could have just walked out of the house as a free woman and expressed her intention to marry this man or anything of that sort. So she was tormented by her situation. And, the next day, sorry, there's the dog's barking, just wait for that. So the next day, when the bird came back, and she told the bird that this is the situation, and the master, who's very fond of me, will never actually surrender me to this other household, so that's not going to happen. And this young man is handsome, and he's talented, and he's rich, and why would he take me for a wife? So I thank you for all the trouble you've taken. You've found this man and everything, but I don't think anything can be done. So the bird listened to it, and it said, okay. It flew back, and it didn't come back until the evening. So at night, it flew back into her room and said, well, I've got a message for you. This young man shows his feelings for you in a verse. He's written this for you. And it recited a poem, which basically went, I don't care if your fan is plain, but my love is for your face, which is so fair. And if we could mount the nuptial bird, we would soar aloft, a wedded pair. And the maid was happy to hear this because, at least she still doesn't know how she will get out of the situation, but at least the man wants to marry her, right? And she confided her desire to the parrot. And then in the morning, she set the bird free. And in his study, this young man had been thinking of the maid, all night and all day. And when he woke up that morning, he saw the bird, and he said, okay, do you have any news for me? And the bird flew down, and the bird told this young man of the maid's affection and how she feels, and he was elated. So he vowed that he was going to marry her. So he wrote about it in a note, sealed it, and gave it to the parrot to take it back to her, right? And the parrot took it back. And after that, the young man heard nothing. There was no bird, there was no message. And for several days after that, he had no news. And finally, he heard from the household that the maid who worked there was now dead. And this was a complete shock. So he made inquiries. He kind of verified it was the woman he loved. And what had actually happened is that the girl did not know to read or write. So when she received the note, she was kind of distressed about how she's going to communicate back with him. So she sent a earring. She removed the earring from her ear, gave it to the bird to carry back to the man, and also to tell him the location of her parents' home so that he could ask him to visit them and make a gift of money to liberate her, to buy her freedom, and then she could marry the man. But as the bird took this earring in its beak and it flew out, midway there was a young boy or a young man, that took a rock, hit the bird on the cheek, and the bird fell dead. And after this, there was a disaster that happened to the maid as well. Because at first, the master favored her because she was beautiful and intelligent and everything. And everyone thought that she would become one of the master's concubines. But when he possibly expressed that wish, she resisted this idea. And then also he had this kind of niggling doubt when she put the blame of the lost bird on other maids and servants. And the other maids and servants also resented this. So when they got the chance, right, they heard her talking to this bird in her room at night, they spread the slander that she was involved with some other man, and they told the master about this. And he became jealous, and he resented it. So he made a search of the maid's room, and he came across the young man's letter to her, where he wanted to marry her. When he got to know about this, he was furious, and he got her, to get the story out of her, he got her beaten up until her body was all covered with bruises. And as she was near her death, with all of those wounds and bruises, he didn't even wait to find out if she was alive or dead. He put her into a coffin and ordered her to be buried somewhere outside the city. So when this young man heard of all of this, he sat there thinking what he was supposed to do, and he dozed off at his desk. And then he had a dream. There was a woman who came in his dream, and she was clothed in feathers. And she saluted him first and then said, "I am the Parrot. And the woman you love is my elder sister. And she's a parrot as well. And thanks to her virtuous conduct in her previous lifetime, she was transformed into a human. And by lucky chance, I was united with her. And I became worried that she would spend her life in an unworthy situation. So I respectfully took this occasion to introduce her to you, because I think you'd be the right husband for her. And I didn't know that I would die before I accomplished this mission. And because of that, my sister had to undergo a humiliation. And she is now in this situation. But she's still alive, and you can save her." And this young man was overjoyed because, he had lost all hope. So he was like, "Okay, what can I do?" And this woman in the dream pointed a finger and said, 100 paces beyond the city, you will find the tomb of the young woman, and it's not very far away. And then the woman fell to the ground, turned into a crane, and she flew into the heavens. And then suddenly the young man woke up. He ordered his horse, he rode out beyond the city wall, and he knew of a certain hamlet, the name of which had a very similar sound to what you call 100 paces. I'm guessing in Chinese, the words sound similar. So that was the hint he had got in the dream. So he went to that particular hamlet, and he looked through the burial sites, and he found the burial site of this young woman. But he couldn't open it right away. So he went back to the hamlet, took a room there, and then he got his servants to accompany him to this place and help him open the tomb. When they picked up the coffin, he could hear the sound of breathing. And he broke open the lid, and the maid returned to life. He was nearly delirious with joy. He took her to a nearby, there was a Buddhist convent, and he knocked at the gates. And there were nuns who opened the gates and asked him his reasons for coming. He told them the whole story. He begged for their help, and they agreed to keep the young woman in the convent until the time she recovered and regained her strength. So the young woman spent about a month there in the convent. And then once she had fully recovered, the young man went back, to his mother, told her the whole story and how he intended to marry the young woman. He met her parents, and after everything sorted out, he finally, the young man and woman got married. And since then, this young man remembered this talking parrot's kindness so much that whenever he met someone who had any of these captive parrots as a pet, he would buy it from them and he'd free the bird. So that's the story.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that story.
What do you think?
I've forgotten how, not really. I just didn't. That's an intense story. That's an intense story.
It is.
I guess there's
Yeah, they did get married.
There's no patriarchy like a Chinese patriarchy. It's like, oh, okay, all right. So I think, I mean, it's just so interesting to me how, this is the Chinese tradition, right? Just clearly forked off from the Indo-European tradition, Indian tradition, into Eastern Europe, into Western Europe, into North America. It's kind of its own fork, right? And so it's fascinating to see how the accent and the tone and the pitch and the rhythm of the melody is different.
Yeah.
How inner masculine and inner feminine circle around each other is a little bit different. But at the same time, you find these like commonalities of, the symbol of the tomb, the symbol of obviously the parrot and the crane, even from just last week. And the symbols of transformation and the physics of transformation are still like, they're stunningly consistent, right? Because you can say, because there's always this theory of like, is it diffusion? Is it like, thousands of years ago, there was the Silk Road and, this image of parrot gets spread around, or is it spontaneous? Where the image of parrot, the image of tomb, the image of transformation spontaneously shows up all over the world. And, linear patriarchal scholars, science scholars are like, well, we can't draw like what the connection is. So maybe it's some connection we didn't know, some causal link. Because otherwise, why on earth would the same image come up in both? Maybe it's aliens coming down from space. And I think the answer that I go through is it's very simple. It's like, we're all human, right? And this is something that emerges out of our biology. It's not just, sort of language and, biology, sort of eyes, ears, hands. It's these aspects of culture, which are not entirely artificial and not out of nature. There are archetypal things that come out of our nature as well. Just like birds all over the world share this image of, a nest and a beak and eggs, right? And they didn't have to teach it to each other. It comes out of just being a bird. So these things come out of just being human as well. So I thought it was very, very interesting. And so let me ask you, Gary, this standard question that I'm asking every time.
Yeah.
And this time I want to ask you to stay on screen and be with me through as we do the notes here. Where did you enter into that story?
Yeah, there were several points that were very interesting to me in the story when I read it first, and then there was this particular thing, because I should mention this at this point, that I picked this story to narrate last week, and this was the original one that I had planned, and what happened was that the dream came in, and then there was so strong that I said, okay, I'll park aside whatever I have picked up and do this first.
So crane and crab.
The crane and crab kind of just came in. So that's So originally, the reason I picked it up to do it last week is because before that we'd done the story called "The Bird of Truth." And I can, I post a link to that, over here. So, and in The Bird of Truth, we're talking about this parrot that speaks in a human voice. And it is, the voice of truth within us. And I had found the exact same motif, although not in a very similar way. But there is this parrot, and it speaks in a human voice, and it kind of is responsible for the union of the masculine and the feminine in the story, the same way as it was in that story as well. So that is the part that pulled me into the story at first.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. So Um, what I want to do for this is, I'm going to go through my notes and just stay with me, because I think this is going to be good for us to just kind of kick the ball around
Right.
Live. So for me, this is it's a lovely story, and this is a story about the inner feminine. This is a journey of the inner feminine, and of how the inner feminine and the correct masculine, right? So all these are about, does she marry and take the subordinate position to the Lord? Does she get with, her true love? Very similar to Cinderella, all of these sort of Western European stories. And again, you can have the question of like, oh, so did they trade traditions or whatever? Maybe they did, but also this idea of the inner feminine and the inner masculine circling around each other, trying to figure out which aspects fit best together. Because as we've said, there are many faces. There's one inner feminine, and there's many faces to her. There's a mother, there's a daughter, there's a sister, there's a lover, auntie, et cetera, and similar with the inner masculine, right? So which aspect of the inner feminine? Will it be the other maids in waiting? Will it be the favored one? Will connect with which aspects of the inner masculine? Will it be the lord of the house? Will it be the son? And so here, and for those of you who haven't been to many of these sessions, the way we read these fairy tales, we read them in exactly the same way we read dreams when we do healing work, right? Which is that you regard every major actor in the story as being a symbol of a different part of your own inner self, right? So the main woman is you, her sister, the parrot, is you, the bathtub is you, the Lord is you, the sun is you, et cetera, et cetera. And so there are all these different parts of you, and you're like, well, what do you mean they're all me? It's like, well, I mean, your heart is you, your liver is you, your lungs are you, and they interact as parts of a whole. And in exactly the same way, when you have a dream or a story like this, what are the ways you take symbolic, guidance, insight, understanding from it? Is that you start at the beginning, you hit play on all these actors, the video unfolds, and you watch for who does what to whom, what the starting point is, what the ending point is. Do masculine and feminine actually get together? You have all these different ways of measuring and looking at, like assessing the quality of the action, right, of the narrative work. So here, this is a journey on how the feminine not just matches to the right masculine, but undergoes this deep transformation herself across a number of different dimensions, right? The girl and her sister, the parrot, and through, full and complete transformation. Now, when you look at the end of the story versus the beginning of the story, both aspects of inner feminine, the sister turns into a crane and ascends. So she completes. She dies and then she completes. And then the girl, she dies and goes literally into the tomb, as we talk about the pattern of transformation. Literally, she goes from caterpillar to cocoon in the tomb to butterfly. Right? The three phases of transformation. She goes all the way through that, and then she matches with the correct inner masculine. And then, the typical happily ever after, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the thing to keep in mind is these are all inner aspects of you, regardless of your outer gender. We all have what we call inner masculine and inner feminine forces within us. You can call them yin yang, you can call them light, dark, left, right. You can call them all these more like politically correct kind of terms, which I personally, not to get into politics, I prefer the politically correct terms. But then when you actually encounter dreams and you actually encounter fairy tales, the inner masculine shows up as, the jerk lord of the house. So it's like we can say, oh, he's not really, he's like the yang factor. And it's like, okay, at the end of the day, I just, I just roll with it, right? I'm just like playing the ball as it lies, right? As it comes out in dreams. So the master here is one aspect of the inner masculine, but he's improper because he's all about power and control. He is subjugating, right, the inner feminine. En masse, he has his harem or whatever, right, ladies in waiting. And even though he favors her, that's not the point. The point is not that you have control over your inner feminine and you favor her and you treat her nicely, kind of, frankly, like a bird in a cage, right? That's not the appropriate way to interact and have relationship with your own inner feminine. Now, again, our natural impulse will be to say, well, this is like a feminist, whatever. And it's like, you can project it onto the outer world. That's not inappropriate. But here we're talking about your own inner feminine, right? To the point, like, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman, right? Or non-binary, whatever your gender, let's say you're a woman, right? You identify gender as woman. The story is saying you have an inner masculine lord that is inappropriately subjugating your own inner feminine in this way. Your outer gender is irrelevant, right? When you read it from this angle, from this lens. This is a human problem within each individual. And then you can read it allegorically as like, well, you should be nice to women. Absolutely, absolutely, right? But that's not the only way you can read it. And so here, the master is one aspect. He's the wrong masculine. There's a right masculine here who loves her and doesn't care about prestige or fear or what other people think. He just loves her. He has the right intention. He's good. But they're not very well developed, right? So the male actors in the story, the inner masculines, are simply props, right? It's not about them, right? More important to the story is what is the journey of the inner feminine within you? And then, the appropriate masculines come in and do what they're supposed to do to sort of further the journey of the inner feminine. And the question then is, what is the mechanism of the feminine to get to the correct endpoint? And so the flow of the story here, there's some sort of really, really interesting points here. The fact that they're both parrots at the end of the day, is a bird is a symbol of the spirit, right? The spiritual realm. Yeah. And as we said in the Bird of Truth story a couple weeks ago, a parrot is an exceptional kind of bridge figure, bridge agent. Because in the Bird of Truth story, one of the superpowers that the boy and girl got when they were out in exile with Obi-Wan Kenobi and learning all their superpowers, John the Baptist, right, that whole thing. One of the superpowers they got was the power to speak to the birds, right, which in the Christian tradition is a mark of the sort of Holy One. They converse with the birds and with the wind. But then a parrot, the actual Bird of Truth, even in that story, a parrot is a bird, a member of the spirit realm, who can come to this realm and actually speak, right? So it's like this translator candidate, this liaison between the spirit and the sort of regular human world. And here you have both inner feminines, which are mirror figures of each other. They're like a left leg and a right leg moving forward, helping each other transform. Two aspects of the inner feminine in parallel, mirroring each other. And they are both parrots. Even though the woman doesn't show her parrot side, she's taking care of the parrot in the cage. That's her only job. Obviously, symbolically, she's equivalent to the parrot. But just in case you're in this sort of, medieval dynastic Chinese audience in the village, we want to make sure we get your gold coins at the end of the story at the festival. The sister makes sure to say she's a parrot too. She's a parrot. Just to make sure we don't lose any of you in the audience, right? Okay, that's good. That's good. Very practical, very Chinese. So the parrot then is a symbol of spirit, and another aspect of the feminine, the maid in waiting. So this is a part of your inner feminine that is without question, right? Spiritual, What are the two major functions of the inner feminine? It's nurturing, right, and vision. And vision. Right? Vision comes from the inner feminine. The muse, the goddess, right? What you're going to actually do, right? How do we deploy the troops? How do we sort of deploy our resources? The vision comes from the goddess. And these are spiritual inner feminines. They're both parrots. They are the bridge from the spirit to, so basically what they say, you got to do, right, within you. And the question is, this power within you, how does it transform and gestate? So one of the ways is that it uses its own power of the bird to kind of transcend the laws and strictures of, in this case, very tight, very strict and constraining patriarchal kind of rules and structures here. Where you can't even leave the house. You can't even go out and marry who you want to marry, right? And so even in that situation, it takes this spirit level within you, right, to kind of thaw the ice and break through. But it is a painful, painful process, right? That doesn't necessarily break the patriarchal structure because it's coded in you, right? Or man, woman, whatever. But basically undergoes its own, it's almost like the inner feminine basically, dies, i.e. transforms. When you see death in one of these stories or dreams, it's a simple transformation of that part of you. So this part of you will undergo this deep transformation and come out the other end. And that's how it basically solves the puzzle, right?
Right.
I mean, the Christian tradition has the same thing. The way I solve the puzzle of how to save the world is I die, and then I come back. And that's the only way out of the prison. You dig underground and come back up.
Yeah.
And again, it's not necessarily a biological death. When I say I die, this part of me dies, completely transforms, comes back. It's almost unrecognizable from its original form, but you look at it and like something in the eyes, something in the smile, something in the voice, you realize that is the same. That is one of the same. This parrot is her sister from another life, et cetera, et cetera. The little boy, but the young man who throws the stone at the bird, again, is just like the Lord, who kills the feminine, and he's not doing her any favors. It's not altruistic, because he grips so tightly, right? He ends up killing her and transforming her, and then that's how she not so much escapes, because there is only one inner masculine. So the man, the true lover, and the Lord are both aspects of the same inner feminine. It's like watching this transformation of acorn into oak tree. And so the boy who throws the stone at the bird is the emerging, because he's even younger than the true love, right? Transforms the spirit of the inner feminine. And that transformation of the spirit of the parrot first is the trigger point, which is spontaneous. It's like he's not even, he comes out of nowhere and fells her with a rock. Right? So the earring, all this stuff is completely disrupted. But then that is the thing that triggers all this other stuff to happen in the household, which gets her basically dumped into the tomb, the coffin, and sent out, where he can finally retrieve her and she can be reborn in all her, sort of glory. So she goes down into the cocoon, and only then, 100 steps out of the house, can the masculine then come and get her out. And what's interesting to me, the quality of the rescue here is not this patriarchal, heroic, oh, I'm coming to save you in my shining armor and white horse, right? It is the co-birthing of each other, right? Her death transforms him as well. Because he was just, as these Chinese stories go, if it had turned another way, he would have just committed suicide or jumped in a river or something, right? Because he couldn't get his true love. So it is this co-birthing of each other. Even the master here, right, is in his own way, not as a person in the outer world, but as a part of you, is facilitating this transformation in its own kind of way. But the half-competent lover, the boy, the master, they're all acting in orbit around this dual inner feminine nucleus, right? Yeah. And the story is about the gestation of this double nucleus moving forward. And you tell, one of the ways to assess the story is what happens in the meat of the story, the right thing or the wrong thing. And one of the ways you can get a sort of flavor for this is where is the inner feminine at the end and at the beginning of the story? The parrot dies, goes down into the cocoon, comes out, and delivers the last part of her message, and then ascends as a crane, which is really interesting because we just had the crane and crab story from last week. In the Chinese system, it's, just crane is higher than parrot. Okay, let's kind of leave it at that. So she ascends, so she hits the brass ring. So from her standpoint, everything in the story, however circumambulatory, was yeah, this is the correct action because this oak turned into the oak tree. So it's okay, great. And you look at the sister, and she gets matched with the correct inner masculine. She comes out of the tomb happily ever after. So that acorn turns into the oak tree as well. And because of that, you can look at the center, the meat of the story, and say, okay, well, there's something here that is going okay. So even the pain, even the miscommunication, all of that is somehow not the thing you should do, but it's well, if the acorn turned into the oak tree, then this must be an acceptable, perhaps one of many, but an acceptable solution to the equation, right? Because the right outcome came.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes so much sense now to have that kind of insight. It's amazing because when you were talking about this, I was thinking about, my younger years and the kind of situation I was in back then and the situation I'm in right now. And purely from the standpoint of assessing the flavors of the inner masculine and the inner feminine, right? When I go back to the previous years, about 10 years ago, let's say, one of the things that I was really struggling with, and I can't put these in these kind of terms now because I know the language and the vocabulary that we were using, but I didn't know it back then, but that's the struggle that was happening, was the lack of vision, right? I was struggling with lack of vision, struggling with figuring out what my bliss was, and how do I manifest it? How do I know what it is? And all of those things, which were particularly in the realm of the feminine. I was probing and searching and trying to find it. But at the same time, the masculine that I was in the grip of, the master archetype, was prestige and money. And not that it was wrong, because I was in a stage of my life where those things were important. Financial stability, having an independent career of my own, and knowing that I am stable in life. Those things mattered, right? So
absolutely,
it was important at that time, but at the same time, I felt the restraint that I had to exercise in terms of leaning towards my feminine because of all of the restraints that I had, right? And it resonates so much with what's going on in the first part of the story, where this maid finds herself in a situation where there's only so far that she can go in her growth. She can only move from a maid in waiting to a concubine, and no further than that. And is that even what she desires?
Yeah.
Clearly not.
And she's the favorite one. She should be grateful that she even gets to potentially be the concubine.
Yeah. But is that what she desires?
Yeah.
The answer is clearly no. But she does not even have how do I put this? She doesn't even have the awareness of what her desire is.
Right.
She hasn't even questioned herself that.
Well, even when the parrot comes back and says, "Oh, I think he likes you," before he says, "I'm willing to sort of marry you," she's like, "Well, that's not even going to work. How is he gonna?
Yeah.
How is my master even going to like let me go?"
Yeah.
There's basically, I mean, in this Chinese patriarchal society, right? It's like there's no path, right? There's structurally there's no path.
Yeah. And when you think about that in terms of this inner masculine, I mean, that is exactly how I felt at that time. How am I going to follow my bliss and vision even when I find it? I mean, mind you, I haven't even found it yet. But there's always these questions already nagging. Saying, how am I even going to follow those things when I have all of these requirements to be met? I have to pay my bills. I have to make sure I have a good, savings fund, and then I'm stable, and I have a good career that people approve of, and I don't want my family panicking because I just took a crazy turn in my career. So how am I even going to do all of these things? It's impossible. I mean, how good can my career get? Right? It can at best be kind of satisfying for about 3 hours a day, maybe. But can it even get better than that? So all of these questions, it resonates so much with that situation. And when I look at the transformation that happened from there to here to what it is, and I'm sure there will be many transformations ahead as well. But when I look back, it was painful. It was not sort of a Disney fairy tale of Cinderella marrying the prince and kind of just changing overnight. It wasn't that easy. And that's reassuring, because then you know that, all right, this painful process is part of the map. It's in the map. It's not a tragedy. It's not something bad that happened only to me.
Yeah.
And it's not that silly me, what an idiot. I didn't know the map, so I kind of blundered through and made all these mistakes, and therefore I had to pay the price of all of that. It's none of that. It's just how the map is, and that's okay. So the shame just kind of melts away just to have this insight. And that's so amazing.
Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, it's not to say it's not painful, right? It's very painful.
It still is. Yeah.
Very painful. It's very distressing. And it's like, and when the acorn swells and bursts, it's horrifying, terrifying.
Yeah.
And as we have said time and again, it's like, and it's not without grief, because everyone's like, oh, rainbows and unicorns, the caterpillar has turned into the butterfly.
Yeah.
Well, number one, the butterfly dies too. It continues, it doesn't end. And number two, it's like, you're allowed to miss the caterpillar. Right? It's like that butterfly will not be a caterpillar again. There has been a loss. And it is a part of the cycle to grieve that loss. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, the attitude of just many modern societies of like, don't look back, just let go, get over it, get a grip and move forward, always look forward, is just, I mean, it's adolescent.
Yeah.
Right? It's adolescent because it's basically turning a blind eye to like this entire half of reality that like, I mean, there is pain and you can run from it, but it's like, it's still going to get you anyway. So it's like, let us examine the pain, right? Let us examine the pain. It must be here for a reason. It must be here for a reason. And so what I love about like the trigger into transformation, right, is that in the beginning, she's like, so taking care of this bird, she's stuck in this intractable situation, right? She's just like describes the situation, the social norms, the legal constraints, the sort of ownership, the sort of, patriarchal, dictatorial, tyrannical sort of force. And that's it. There's no option, right? And the man can't ride in his, white steed with his shining armor and pull her out of there anyway. He's a part of the system, right? He will get arrested and executed for like, sort of disturbing this household and the maids in waiting.
Yeah.
So there's this complete stalemate of a situation. This is not a masculine-centered story where the knight rescues the maiden. There is no rescue, right?
Yeah.
There is no rescue. This to me is all about the power of the feminine, your inner feminine. So like, again, just to keep reminding this, because we naturally go into these outward-facing sort of reflexes. If you're a man and you're listening to the story, I'm talking about your own inner feminine, your own inner feminine, where your own inner power masculine cannot go in and save her. This is a spontaneous transformation she undergoes herself. I mean, it would be nice if you saw it and like let the lady, this part of you let the maid in waiting out. But what this is saying is not that you should or shouldn't do that. It's like, it's not allegorical. It's not telling you what to do. It's describing, it's a diorama of a state of affairs that is so, right? So this transformation will happen spontaneously within you, whether you take the position of the lord of the house and you don't want it to happen, or if you take the position of the young man, the lover, where you want it to happen. Doesn't matter. It's going to happen. It's going to happen, right? And the way it happens, the zoom in, is that the inner feminine has an even higher spirit side that facilitates everything, right? It's the spirit side, which is the one that gets assigned to her sister, finds the right candidate, facilitates the bond between them. And then even then, right? So you have like spiritual awakening. You start reading all these books. You start understanding things you didn't understand before. That's great. You're like finding the real sort of inner masculine out there. But the point of this story, which is kind of Chinese in its sensibility, it's like, yeah, you can have all that and you're still going to be in stalemate, because this is medieval China. And the way it is the way it is, right? So just shut up and eat your bun, eat your dessert. And so even after all this supernatural power and facilitation, even within you, I've been to all these retreats, I've gotten all these insights, you still hit a wall. You still come back to the reality of your stalemate. And this is the way circumambulation happens. You have all these like things, you're like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. And then you wake up the next morning and you're almost embarrassed at how much power came through you, and you laugh it off and you're like, oh, that was nothing. And all the intellect comes in and sort of tries to like stuff it back in the box, right? And then later you're like, okay, it wasn't like the key to everything, but it's also not nothing. I have to face this thing, right? The pendulum swinging back and forth and you going around in the labyrinth. So the physics of it is that there's a part of your inner feminine that is just waiting, that's stuck, and does not know what to do. There's a key symbol here, which is this symbol of gestation, which is the bath. What does she do when she's watching the bird? She takes a bath. She's in the bath all day. She's not braiding her hair, which is a very different symbol. She's not weaving and unweaving like Penelope in the Odyssey, which is a very different symbol. She's literally just sitting in the bath, soaking. And the bathtub, especially in Asian culture, is a symbol of the womb, right? You typically give birth in the bathtub traditionally, and then after you die, your body is placed in the bathtub to rinse it and prepare it for burial. That's why old Zen masters would make comments like, from bathtub to bathtub, all I have uttered is stuff and nonsense, right? And they're basically saying from birth to death, from womb to tomb. That's what they mean. And so in this state of resting and not knowing, the spirit guides her, right? The spirit guides her. This is the spirit that she nourishes and holds sacred space for. Interestingly, with the express consent and favor of the tyrannical inner masculine fear, threat, and control segment of you. So he says, you go and watch this. What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? You go and watch this.
You should
And
meditate every day. You should
yeah,
meditate every day because it's good
meditate
for you.
every day because it's good for you, because you'll have higher productivity at work. So as your employer, I'll like hire people to come teach you to meditate. What could possibly go wrong? And then your star employees like realize this is not their bliss, and they leave. They don't just leave your company, they leave the industry, right? Yeah, sorry, I'm getting flashbacks of like, yeah, there's nothing more upsetting to a tech CEO than when your top engineers not just leave your company, they leave the industry altogether. I'm like, it's like a race car driver watching a Maserati just like tow up a wagon or something. It's come back. I can give you more prestige. Come back. And so the spirit takes care of her in ways she doesn't even understand. Mm-hmm. Right? The spirit breaks out of the cage and she thinks she's done. Right? I'm dead. Mm-hmm. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna lose my license. I'm gonna be debarred, right, from being a lawyer or an attorney or whatever. Like, my in-laws are gonna have my head for this, right? Mm-hmm. The spirit takes care of you in ways you don't even understand. And we've said this before, but this is in the nature of the sacred, right? Mm-hmm. What is something that becomes sacred? It's something that you give your attention to. Your attention is energy, right? So whatever you give your attention to becomes imbued with your energy. This is the power of celebrities, right? People are celebrities. You see them in movie after movie, and everyone gives them their attention, and that's their power of celebrity. And often, it happens to them because it's just a part of their circumambulation. And the humans that are, these transistors flowing billions of volts through them can't handle it. They burn out. They need to numb and soothe with drugs and alcohol to sort of just because it's overwhelming for any one mortal person to sort of go through all that. And I just say that as a way of sort of illustrating the idea that attention is not just like what you're looking at. There is energy when you put your attention on something. And so when you put your attention on something with care and nourishment, it becomes sacred, right? So the thing you take care of becomes sacred. It could be a rock, it could be a statue, it could be any kind of object. It could be a person. It could be a pet. It could be a cat or dog, an animal that you care for. Mm-hmm. Typically, the thing you take care of becomes sacred. And then, as a sacred thing, it then turns around and takes care of you. That's the mechanism. So she takes care of this bird, and then this bird turns around and takes care of her. And the bird actually says out loud, I mean, this bird is almost like the chorus. It's like, by the way, sister, she calls her sister. And we don't know till later why she calls her sister. Mm-hmm. Take care of me and I'll take care of you. That's the basic deal. Okay. Yeah. And in the whole circumambulation of this spirit bird also gets transformed. The bird herself gets transformed for death. And it's like, oh, is that a punishment for having helped her? It's like, no, it's like that's because she is doing the things she's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. She advances on the game board of circumambulation as well. And, this boy comes out of nowhere and just, this other part of the inner masculine blindsides you and transforms the spirit part of you as well. And then she comes back as the parrot, the feather lady in the dream, finishes the transformation for her sister. Mm-hmm. And then she ascends. She doesn't just disappear, right? She ascends as a crane. So okay, whatever she did, that was the completion of her cycle and she finished. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's like good. Whatever she did is something to like take notes on. Right? It's not you better do it like this. There are many ways to get from A to B, but this is one of the ones that got to B. So it's like we can like mine it for like insights. Okay. And so so the crane is a sacred figure in Chinese mythology. And so the other interesting thing here is the fact that there are two sisters, right?
Mm.
So clearly one of them did better from the sort of Taoist Confucian model of she became human first, right? So when you, I mean, it's anthropomorphic. It's, you know, the Chinese are humans, so we favor ourselves. So we have this thing where it's like, oh, if you're an animal, if you do well, you'll turn into a human, and that's better, which, you know, is debatable, can be debatable, but anyway, in this system, she does well. She becomes human first. That's not seen as a tragedy, but as a description of the normal action. She pulls ahead, and then the parrot assists her. The parrot assists her, and then she pulls ahead into becoming the crane. And then the crane assists her, right? As she turns into a crane, and she pulls ahead and becomes the full wife, equal to the inner masculine, not the concubine, not the girl in waiting.
Mm-hmm.
So you see all these parts are moving, but not in a symmetrical, orderly, linear fashion. It is, these two sisters are like your legs when you walk, right? When you walk, you don't hop forward both feet together in lockstep, right? Your feet move asymmetrically, right? Your strides are not equal. Your left and right parts of the body are not entirely, you know, one leg is a little shorter than the other, one ear is a little higher than the other. And this is all imperfection. And in this imperfection is where all the action happens, right? One leg shuffles forward, and then you start falling forward. And then the other leg goes not up level with the first leg, but forward to catch it. And then, you know, like, so walking is this sort of imperfect act of just falling forward in this continuous manner. That's where, but in that imperfection, in that asymmetry, is kind of where all the action happens.
Yeah.
Thoughts?
It's kind of interesting that you say that, because I think it's understandable to say that as we grow, as the inner feminine or the inner masculine within us kind of grows and evolves and transforms, the way we engage with the spirit, the way we engage with the soul, as we spoke in the last week's session, also kind of evolves, because it's not just one aspect that's evolving. It takes everything else together with it. But, you know, they all still look very different from each other. They have different trajectories, different paths. So one of the things that occurred to me when you were saying this about the similarities, like I spoke earlier about the bird of truth, the parrot in the other story, and the parrot in this story have so many common things in that they both are sort of instrumental in liberating the feminine, right? If you remember the bird of truth story, the queen, the king's wife, is locked up in a tower in the mountains.
Right.
And it's only because the bird of truth goes and tells the king about the reality of what happened. Finally, she's able to, you know, come out of the tower.
Come out of the tomb, yeah.
Yeah, and in this case, come out of the tomb, because the bird gives a message to the young man about what really happened, and that's how he's able to get her out of the tomb. And the similarity is just that you wonder, and this story focuses so much about the entire gestation process of the feminine's transformation, right? And in the other story, in the bird of truth, it was more about the action of how you get to the bird of truth. So you don't really touch the part where you can wonder what really happened to the queen who was locked up in the tower for so many years. I mean, what was going on for those 15 years she was locked in?
Right. This story is like a zoom in of the gestation that happened in that tower.
Yeah. So this is more like, so this is the physics of what happened. So it's fascinating to me how these two very different stories have like a common junction where they seem to meet for a while. And one almost seems like an offshoot of the other. So to me, it's like, what happens to the inner feminine is that she is resting and waiting and resting and waiting, and not in a pleasant way, not in a nourishing way.
Mm.
And yet that is part of her growth, surprisingly, because when
Mm.
she comes out of it, she is in a different place and more powerful than before.
Mm.
So, I mean, that's just fascinating, because we always tend to think of being locked up in the tower, being buried alive, as symbols of, we think of them as tragedies.
Mm.
Something terrible happened, but
Mm.
in these stories, it's that, this is what it is. And what's even more fascinating is how close you come to engaging with this bird of truth, the so-called bird of truth, when you're in that situation. You're literally engaging with your deepest desire.
Mm.
Because that's what the bird in this story keeps asking the maid.
Mm.
What is it that you desire? Because I can make it happen, but you need to tell me, is this what you really want?
Mm. That's very
And
good. Yeah.
yeah,
Because I mean, if you step back from the story, from having heard the whole thing, all the backstory, that this bird is actually her sister,
yeah,
and they knew each other from a previous life.
yeah,
And so symbolically, it is this mirror image of you. It's not even, I mean, what am I trying to say? Mythopoetically,
mhm,
it's not even like it's your twin or sort of younger sister.
mhm,
Mythopoetically, it is this other part of you. It's like left eye, right eye. They're both you.
yeah,
Right? Symbolically, we just call them sisters. So you're like, oh, in real life, I'm very close to my sister. But it's like, it's even closer than that. It's left eye, right eye. It's left ear, right ear, right?
mm,
Even when it's that close,
mhm.
you should think, well, obviously my sister knows my desire, doesn't she?
Yeah,
Right? Obviously it's to get like the right guy, isn't it? And so it begs the question of like, even when it's that close, it
mm,
is me.
mm,
She still asks her,
yeah,
and she still has to say it out loud.
yes,
And that's mind blowing. Because it's what it's saying is,
yeah, yeah,
you have this spirit power. You can send it out anywhere. You can do anything, right? I can get
mhm,
this guy. I can get that guy. I can basically, she's flying over the entire realm. She can pick any guy out there. You can have anything. You can do anything.
mm,
And it's not some genie muse out there. It is within you. The power
mhm,
to do anything is within you.
mm,
Even in spite of that, to presume that this power that basically is me
mm,
will know what I deeply desire
mhm,
without me saying it out loud, basically to myself,
mhm.
is false. Even if it's you, you have to say your desire out loud to yourself.
Yeah,
Um, and people talk about like, well, it's just, can you just like give me what I want, give me things that pleasure me, give me things that I like.
mm,
And this pattern says, I don't know what to tell you. The answer is no.
mm,
It's like, it's an acorn. Obviously, you stick it in the dirt with water and some sunshine, it will become an oak tree. And it's like,
mm,
well, yeah, no, actually, no, not really. It's like, well, what are you talking about? Right. And the
mm,
answer is, the acorn has to say yes.
mm.
Acorn has to say, I will become an oak tree, which
Yeah,
seems completely ridiculous.
yeah,
From a sort of Western scientific, it's like the acorn has no free will. It is like designed as it is. It will become that, right? And this is saying no. That attitude is wrong. By that attitude, she would have become just a concubine,
mm,
because that's the acorn bind she's in.
mm,
The thing that rules above even that
mhm,
is for the acorn to actually say what its desire is. So I'll add another element here. We've said attention has power, right?
mm,
And one of the ways of thinking about the physics is attention plus will, right, is intention. Like a sort of standard sort of way of thinking about it. And the thing to add to that is what we talk about, which is when you say, attention plus will is intention. Well, with will, there are those three levels of need, want, and desire. So attention plus your desire is intention toward your bliss.
Yeah.
Right. It is your attention toward the thing you like and move toward for no good reason. Your bird just flies out and gets it. Right. Once you desire. And that is your intention toward bliss. You're like, won't I just naturally do my bliss on my own? Well, yeah, I mean, it will flow and try to get through the door of the master's house. But there's a reason it flows through you. Like, you need to actually get the door open. And if it's completely bound shut, you need to sort of send spirit out, sit in sacred space, and stuff will start happening magically. I mean, it's not really magically. It's just like you need to say yes. And then whatever needs to happen will happen. But nothing happens. Even the most elementary 2 + 2 = 4, even that doesn't happen in the direction of desire and bliss until you put your attention on it and you say, my will is this. What is your deepest desire? You're like, shouldn't I just know? Even your sister doesn't know. Even your own inner parent, whom you sit with in sacred space day after day, doesn't know. I mean, maybe she knows intellectually, but you are the CEO, you are the sovereign of your inner world and your life. You have to sign the authorization. And it can't just be like online where you just click accept. You have to read the damn thing. You have to write it.
Yes.
You have to write it, read it, sign it, hand it off, and then follow up and make sure. Just like, I mean, I don't care what level of CEO you are, right? You still have to follow up to make sure your edicts are followed up on and actually implemented.
Yeah.
So that point about the bird asking again and again is very, very important.
Yeah.
So on the coffin, did you have say?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the coffin is the next, big part of it. Like I said, locked up in the tower in the mountains, going into the coffin, buried alive, still breathing, is just, again, a reinforcement of how this is, which is just that this process is not pretty. Once you realize and you awaken to your desire, which is what happens to the maid, she realizes that she wants to be married to this young man. And then you think the next thing is all, wedding bells and everything, but you've got to watch out because you're going into the coffin now. Because that's the next step. I mean, you would never guess, but that's the next step.
Yeah, and there is this funny, I haven't really sort of, like, there's so many aspects of the story that we won't have time in a space like this to go into, but there is this interesting connection between this coffin transformation and the power of voice. And I haven't quite worked out what it is, but one of the things she loses when the parrot dies is her power of voice.
Yeah.
She cannot communicate to her inner masculine, to her ideal inner masculine. She can't read or write, right? So she's not literate. And the one way she could communicate with her inner masculine through the spirit, right, is gone. And so she loses the power of voice and then goes into the coffin, which to me is very reminiscent of like the Grimm's brothers story of Snow White, which we won't do here. We actually do in the main sort of healing series. And in Snow White, she bites the poison apple given to her by the sort of evil queen, stepmother, witch, and goes into this glass coffin, right? The seven dwarfs put her in the glass coffin. And they're marveling at like how she doesn't, rot, how she looks like fresh as, the sort of driven snow.
Yeah.
And the reason you find out at the end, this is the original Grimm's brother, not the Disney version, is that a piece of the apple caught in her throat.
Yeah.
Right. In other words, she lost her voice.
Yeah.
She lost her voice. And the insight, because it's a clear glass coffin, right? So the insight of this transformation here, that is transparent if you have eyes to see, right? If you look at it through a mythopoetic lens, is that the transformation here is her loss of voice. This is the thing that this false wisdom of the apple has led to.
Yeah.
And there are all kinds of, aspects of the false wisdom, like, all the maids in waiting say you'll never be anything but a maid in waiting. If you're lucky, if you're good, you can be a concubine. But anything else, that's not even conceivable, right?
Yeah.
And so when the prince in Snow White rescues her, the way the mechanism works is like he picks up the coffin to take her back to his palace to sort of figure out like if they can heal her or whatever. And in the process of shaking the coffin, the apple falls out of her throat and she instantly comes alive. So the inner masculine even here is more like not this sort of literally, it's like the Disney Cinderella prince, right, who comes to save her. Even there, if you look carefully at the details, it's not that he rescues her in his shining armor and steed and fights the dragon. Mm-hmm. He brings her for healing, and in the process, sort of releases her voice in the process. Mm-hmm. Right. So he's less like this sort of masculine patriarchal savior and more like a midwife. Right? Pulls her out of the womb of transformation.
Yeah.
Like a male midwife. And so when he's rescuing her, and this is just like this story, but in Snow White, when he's rescuing her, he's also rescuing himself because she is his equal, and he can't finish his cycle without the inner feminine.
Yeah.
One way to think about it is, and we talked about this in our brainstorm, mm-hmm. when your inner bullies are attacking you for so long,
mm-hmm.
and then finally eject you. This happened in the Bird of Truth, right? How did you find the Bird of Truth? You listened for where the squawking birds were all crowded around, ready to beat up something. Mm-hmm. Right? You follow the voices of the bullies, and wherever they're like, oh yeah, there she is, like sort of, beat her up and shame her and everything. It's like, mm-hmm. you follow that, and whatever they're pointing to you, that's the thing you grab and rescue and get the hell out of there, right? In the Bird of Truth story, even the king was like, how do we, the king was clueless, and it was only because the courtiers were like, we have to stop this bird, we have to stop this bird. And then finally they were so loud about it, he was like, what bird? And they were like, oh, nothing. It's like, no, you're and he pulls her out.
Yeah.
So here, in this sort of Chinese inflected version, mm-hmm. to fully escape control and the expectations of this sort of Lord of the House inner bully, mm-hmm. One of the ways is to utterly fail them. Utterly fail them.
Yeah.
Right. And this is you won't see this in any good Tiger Mother's allegorical reading of the story, right?
Yeah.
But if you read it mythopoetically, symbolically, not allegorically, the way she gets out of this very constrained system is through failure.
Yeah.
Right. The only way to get out of school is to get kicked out of school. You can't even drop out. You're stuck. They won't let you drop out. Yeah. Right. And if you constantly meet or even exceed their expectations, the noose only gets tighter. The only way out is through death/transformation. If you fail badly enough, then you will be ejected. The only way to escape is through failure. And so even speaking those words as a Chinese American, right? I'm Chinese and I did the whole prestige thing. So it's like, to even say those words, the only way to escape is failure, I start breaking out in hives. The fact that I'm pulling this insight out of a Chinese story, it's like I'm just sensing my like patriarchal ancestors going like, oh, we're really gonna have to do something about this one. He is really going off the reservation here. It's like not okay. But that's where the brainstorm is. That's where my bird of truth and spirit is leading me. So I'm just going to roll with it.
Yeah, like I said, it's just so liberating to kind of realize that what you did wasn't a blunder. What you did wasn't because you were an idiot and you couldn't read the map. It was because it was part of the map. And you failed spectacularly because that was the only way you could get to your actual destination. Right. And that is amazingly liberating, because the shame just melts away. And that is the thing that's those are the bullies who are squawking at you and still trying to drown the voice of truth, right? So that's just amazingly clear in its message.
And you can't know that at the time. Right? You're not like, I hereby heroically failed this test in the name of liberation. That's not going to fly, right? Yeah. Nobody knows enough to do it like that.
Yeah.
At the time, you really think your life is over. It's like, that's it. I didn't get into this school. I didn't get into whatever school that everyone was pushing me to get into. I didn't win this award. I didn't win the Nobel Prize. That's it. I'm done. That was the whole purpose of my life. Yeah. I've completely failed. And the answer is, yes, from a certain lens, from the profane lens, from the fear, threat, and control lens, you absolutely failed. You failed spectacularly. Yeah. I'll light our cigars off the flaming mess that you've left. Okay. Yeah. But you failed in a very specific context. You failed in the context and scenario of the Lord's house.
Yeah.
Or if you succeeded beyond everyone's wildest dreams, congratulations. You get to be not just even a concubine, you get to be first concubine. First concubine. Congratulations. Look at all the ladies in waiting who didn't even make fifth concubine. You should be really, really happy. And you're like, I still feel dead inside. I still feel like a zombie. And why is that? Right? Why? Yeah. Only when you eject completely out of that and go to the mythopoetic coffin does the transformation actually, complete. And if you read it, it's like, what other way? I mean, it was all spelled out in the first half of the story. Was there any other way you could have gotten out? And the answer is obviously not.
Yeah.
Obviously not. So it's almost like often the muse, will come to you and it's like, okay, this is the path forward. Already you're very spiritual. You're talking to your muse, right? You're talking to your parrot. And your parrot's like, this is the path forward. And you're like, effing no. No, that cannot be. There has to be a better path. Come on, you're my friend. Work with me. Pull some strings. Call some people. Right? Do something. And she's like, I know this is hard, but I already did. This is the best deal. There is no better deal. The only alternative is to not go. And only in hindsight, when you look back, if you ask yourself, and people rarely do because everyone's looking forward. Everyone's looking for their next peak experience, next transformation. If you stop and you look back and you're like, okay, when I was complaining and worried about all that, and I went through anyway, and now I'm crawling out of the coffin.
Yeah.
If you stop and look back and say, now that I've gone through and I have the same 2020 hindsight as my muse did earlier, it's the muse.
Yeah.
Can I honestly say, if I were talking to my own self 2 or 3 years ago, there was, and now because I've gone through and I can look back, was there any easier way for me to get from there to here? Right. And in my experience, the answer always is, dang, no, I guess not. So all of the sort of turmoil, trials and tribulations you went through was actually, however messy and twisty it was, in hindsight, you realize it was actually the shortest path, buzz line, path of least time and least pain.
Yeah.
And having said that, the actual experience of the least time and least pain was decades and screaming, howling pain.
Yeah.
And you look back and you're like, and then, the follow-on question is, was it worth it? Right? And that's for each person to decide. But if you get to the point where you're actually able to actually not even just keep charging forward, but stop and look back, typically your reaction is like, yeah, I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, but yeah, it was worth it. Obviously, I would do it again. What other choice do you have? Or you're not going to just stay there and be like this dried out acorn in like the Harvard sort of biology department, right? And not become your oak tree. It's very prestigious, but I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy, frankly. Yeah. Although many, there's only so much you can do. Like in sacred space, you can't go in and like, you can't bust into the Harvard Museum and start like liberating acorns. It's just not how it works. Yeah. The acorns need to go through their own sort of process.
Yeah. It's interesting that in the story, the parrot actually says that to the woman, says, I wish I could rescue you both out of the compound wall, but I can't. I can only communicate what you want and what he wants. So I can't really lift you up out of where you are.
I thought that was, I totally agree. And I connected that back to the roses and nettles story. Because in that story, there was the unearned boon because she like perfume, roses sprung up in her footsteps, right? The unearned boon.
Yeah.
And then right in the beginning of the story, she tries to run off with the prince.
Right.
And that doesn't work. You can't just eject and sort of skip ahead.
Yeah.
And here, because she has guidance of spirit's like, yeah, I can't just like airlift you out of here. Right? I can't just tell your guy to come and you like let your hair down. He comes up and like rescues you. I would love to help you avoid the pain, but if we do it like that, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
We know from roses and nettles, if you do it like that, there's an even longer circumambulation that happens. And it's not like bad. It's like if that's the way you got to do it, that's the way you got to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I love these different stories where you can compare and contrast. It's like, so what if she pulled out faster and tried to escape? Well, we have that example. We saw what happened there.
Yeah.
And you can start to triangulate and really get a clear picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. So do you have reflections for the exercise?
Yeah. Any other thoughts before we move to that?
I kind of wanted to share these two dreams of mine from like many, many years apart. But so it's funny how this came up. When we're talking about the co-birthing of the inner masculine and inner feminine in this way. So one of the dreams I had many, many years ago, I can't remember if it was 2013 or 14, I think, back then, because I keep this dream journal. I have to go back and look. And this was a very powerful dream. I can remember it even without
7 years ago.
Yeah. Where, in the dream, I saw a pregnant woman wearing a red dress, right, in her parents' house. And in my mind, through the dream, that was all me, but, it looked very different and the woman looked very different. So this pregnant woman in her parents' house, and she's just walking through the rooms, and suddenly there's a hand, a disembodied hand, because there's no one attached to it. It's just a hand out of the air that holds a gun to her and actually shoots. Sorry, should have given graphic warning before it. So basically, in the dream, she dies, right? And that was a very disturbing dream for me at the time. I was very stressed, yeah. And you worked with me in that dream, and you told me how you read it at the time, and I completely resonated with that. Where this pregnant woman is the vision, the muse, the bliss, waiting to give birth to the new beginning of that manifestation.
She was wearing a red dress. I remember that.
She was wearing a red dress.
Yeah.
This is prime, goddess at the time. kind of waiting to give birth to this new bliss and the new beginning. And that's kind of sabotaged in a way, seemingly in the dream, by this man's hand who I can't see. I don't know who the man is. And there's a gun in the hand.
Right. The gun is masculine, obviously.
Yeah. Also a little detail in the dream is that it's all fine because in the attic there was a cat giving birth to a litter of kittens, which seemed like, that's okay. Don't worry about the loss of, life and everything. It's going on just fine. What's happening here is just...
Can't stop it.
Yeah. But it was still distressing because to me, as a reflection of my own inner masculine, in this masked, burglar kind of way, coming in and sabotaging something that was so sacred and precious to me, was
and explicitly
really
disembodied.
Explicitly disembodied, yeah, exactly. And then, move forward to the present day. This was just, I think, a couple of months ago that I had this dream where I saw this elderly man who I felt very like a father for me. And I went and kind of hugged him and said goodbye. And I had to leave. And here, this was the thing. I could smell him. I could feel the touch of his skin. There was all the aspects of the embodiment thing where I could feel his presence, and yet I had to say goodbye and leave. And the next thing I know, that there is someone that zooms past, and this is on the street, right? So zooms past, and I don't know what happens, but he's lying on the ground with his hands chopped off. So go to him, and I sit with him, and I talk to him, take him to a hospital. Then I sit with him in the hospital, and I went back and spoke to this dream character, right? Because I wanted to know more of this mechanics of what was going on, because this was equally thing. And what this inner masculine character told me was that if you don't leave, and you stay the way you're staying right now, my hands can grow back. And for my hands to grow back, I've got to have meaning and purpose. Because I need something to do with those hands. So that's, the hands chopped off is not a problem. But if you leave and I have no meaning and purpose, and then, the hands won't grow back.
Yeah, because you don't need them.
Yeah, and I was like, okay, what do I need to do to make your hands grow back? He's like, nothing. Just you tell me the meaning and purpose, and they grow back so that they can do what needs to be done to get that.
Wow. So tell me your desire.
Yeah. So it was that entire, when I put those two dreams together.
Yeah.
One is an active sort of sabotage of meaning and purpose. So it seems. But then that's a transformation, because the feminine and the masculine seem a little off. And then there is this phase where, again, the feminine and masculine are off, but now the masculine is saying that this is what needs to be done for the situation to be healed. And the message is that it is a co-birthing. In the first
they heal each other.
Yeah. And the first dream, it's the masculine kind of triggers the transformation of the feminine by bringing about her death. And in the second one, by leaving, the feminine triggered the chopping of the hands and the awakening of the masculine, so to speak, that this is what needs to be done for the healing. So it's not that they're two independent things. I mean, there is vision and there is manifestation. And if they both need to kind of move forward, they both need to kind of trigger each other's transformations and pull each other out of the situation, just like in the story. But like they both kind of working together, although they don't know it. It seems like they're two different planes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. But this story just brought up all those memories from the previous dreams. Yeah.
I mean, also, I think this goes without saying, but that is just a great example of the value of keeping a dream journal. 7 years from one dream to the next. Now, just so everyone knows, you've had more than just 2 dreams in the last 7 years. Have you?
Yeah.
But you can pick out the thread of what the continuities are.
There are threads. There are different threads, but then there's common themes all over. Yeah.
I mean, one of the beauties of this kind of keeping track of your dreams, even the fairy tales we're doing, is that it really, it's like you treat it, you take care of your dream side.
Yeah.
And you nourish it just like the parrot, right?
Yeah.
And when you take care of it, you write it down, you ask it questions, you do all the stuff we do in healing. Your dreams then start to turn around and take care of you.
Yeah.
And even, just as friends, it's like, I remember these dreams when you told them to me, because they're very sort of stunning sort of images and happenings.
Yeah.
And it just reminds me of something Hemingway once said about, like, what he aims for in his writing. I would say the same about dreams, which is like, he's like, I know I've gotten it to that level I want, where, you read the story and it like hits you in this way where, even though it's fiction, even though it didn't happen to you, you remember it as if it was something that happened in your life.
Right. Wow.
And his stories all sort of strike me like that, where you remember like this part of the story and you remember it as almost like a historical moment in your own life when you experience that story. So people ask me, how do I remember dreams from like years and years later of other people? It is because of that. It becomes like, for me, woven into their overall sort of life story. I often remember people's dreams more than I remember like, and it's like, oh yeah, and then I broke up with this person. I was like, oh really? What? Oh yeah. Oh, but the dream I remember. The dream I remember.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there more? Anything else you want to say there?
No, I mean, I think there's so much packed up in this story. I want to know what reflections you would want us to focus on this week.
Okay. All right. Okay, so let's talk about the exercise. So the exercise we came up with here is, again, the 4th principle of proceeding sacred space: no expectation of participation. Just a suggested fun exercise to do between now and the next session, only if you want. Only if you want. If you do it, you won't necessarily gain anything, and if you don't do it, you won't necessarily miss out on anything. There's no fear, threat, or control. And the way you would do this exercise is just a prompt for you to sort of reflect. Do this in some 5 or 10 minute period where you have some protected alone time this week. At home, if your home is like a busy zoo packed with people, when you're perhaps driving out to get groceries and you park, or you're going out for a walk, like before you go into the grocery store, you sit in your car a little bit longer, 5 or 10 minutes, think about these questions, keep pen and paper, and then write out whatever comes to you. And the questions are basically to reflect on, again, only if you want, what was one of your biggest failures in your life? Okay. When I say failure, it doesn't matter if people on the outside saw the failure or not, or even if people on the outside see it as a failure or not. They could be like, no, that's not a failure. That led you to all these things. It doesn't matter what other people think, whether it was like good or bad. But a failure where between you and your own self, there was a failure. So we're not talking about loss of external prestige or validation. For you, within your own inner kingdom, you're like, this was a failure. We really just did not get what we wanted here. We really missed the mark, and to the point where we even had like grieving that we couldn't even share because everyone thought it was great. But I was like, that's not what I wanted. And so define one of these examples, and then with this failure, how, if it did, how did it actually liberate you, if indeed you feel it did, right? And how, in hindsight now, did you potentially will for it to happen? Because the parrot is you. The parrot who's doing all this stuff that, oh, I had no idea, is you. And in hindsight, when you realize it's you, you realize, oh, I actually did this. I sabotaged this thing to get myself to this point. Because really, there was no other way for me to escape that school other than to just fail the heck out. So how in hindsight did you actually will for it to happen if you did? And thus contribute actively to the failure. The thing that you grieved, the thing that hurt yourself so much, was the thing you secretly actively contributed to. Because like in the story, that would have been, there was no other way out. There was no other way out. Another thought on this, given the path then, from then, the point of this failure to now, is there any other way it could have happened? Right, to get from point A back then to point B where you are now. So if you are as you are now, and you are bargaining with your younger self right at the cusp of that failure back then, and your younger self was bargaining with you, I want to get to where you are now. I want the same result, just without the pain. I want to do it some easier way. Now with 2020 hindsight, could you have told your younger self, honestly, that there was actually any other way of getting through? But if you were the muse to your own younger self, could you have offered any easier way to actually get the same effect and result? The answer for most people is no. There are probably other ways you could have gotten through with less pain, but you wouldn't be where you are now. There are probably many other ways you could have gotten to where you are now, but worse, with even more pain, right? And we avoided that. We didn't avoid all pain, but we avoided the pain that could be avoided, and the pain we took was the pain we had to take, because we wouldn't have never gotten to this place of insight, of vision, of whatever, of liberation without that. And sometimes when you do this exercise, you have this realization that, like, we actually avoided a lot of pain. Like, everything that could have been done was done. And sometimes realizing that alone is a very sobering kind of thing. Like, all that stuff, even like broken relationships, addiction, self-harm, all these things you realized, like, you would never, with a straight face and with, sound mind and body, prescribe that in a control, like, this is the cure, you're going to go through all this. You can never predict that. You can never guarantee that. So you would never wish that on your worst enemy. But you yourself, looking back, between you, yourself, and the wall, nobody else, it was a failure that maybe nobody even knew about. And you knew, in hindsight, on reflection, there's no other way it could have happened. It had to have happened that way. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, and there was no other way it could have happened. That is, in a word, gestation, circumambulation, grief, all wrapped up in one flavor. It's a bitter flavor, but it's almost like coffee. After you get used to the flavor, the bitterness, you kind of recognize it for what it is. I won't say you actually long for it, but when you taste the bitterness of coffee, you don't freak out. You're like, okay, this is what it is. It's actually, like, you start to appreciate the different contours of it. So anyway, that's the exercise we came up with for you to consider trying, only if you want. Only if you want. All right, so I think that's it. Oh, it's 12 o'clock. So I'm go ahead and close the session. The next session is, next Sunday. Same time. It's free, open to the public. I'll just drop the link to next Sunday's session here. Feel free to invite others, but you don't have to, only if you want. And you can sign up for it now using the link that we provided. And I'll go ahead and close the session. I hereby close the session of our shared sacred space. Thank you for holding this space with me and us, and thank you for sharing the nourishment, the emotional nourishment, and the spiritual nourishment of the shared sacred space with us. I give you my blessing. Go in peace, bestowed with blessing, free of fear, free of threat, and free of the undue control of others. Have a great day, have a great week, and I will see you all in the next session. Thank you.